Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to World Talks. My name's Don Arleth, and let's get started. In just 3 days, Czechs will head to the polls in the parliamentary general elections. Yesterday, Czech President Petr Pavel made a speech to the nation encouraging citizens to get out the vote, speaking about security and democracy. So what impact did the president's address have, and can it stop the Russia-friendly former prime minister and businessman Andrej Babiš from making a political comeback at a time when solidarity around Ukraine is critical? Joining me now to discuss is Ján Michalčák, former head of the Unit for Countering Hybrid Threats at the Czech Defense Ministry. Hello, good morning, great to see you, and thanks for coming on this morning.
Good morning from Brussels.
Yes, now, how do you rate the president's speech that he made yesterday overall?
First of all, it needs to be said that it's quite unusual in Czechia, at least, for a president to make such an appeal just before an election. You said it yourself. 3 days to go, and the president goes live, broadcast on all major networks with a quite open appeal for people to get out the vote. It was basically, I think, as much as a sitting president can afford to say on live television. He clearly made sure to communicate the message that it is important to vote, that people should be wary of voting pro-Russian parties without naming one, of course, because that would be very thin ice, and Pavel didn't do that, and warning about the dire security situation in Europe. So I think the current governing coalition will be pleased because for them, in their perspective, who wanted to could, so to speak, read between the lines, and it was a clear appeal by the president for them not to vote the current opposition. The current opposition, on the other hand, is probably not offended as such, because, as I say, the president didn't attack anyone, but his political leanings could be seen in the address, definitely.
Was there anything in the president's speech that you think that he missed or that he left out?
I mean, the fact about the security situation in Europe and how important it is that people vote, parties who are responsible and, for example, don't want to leave the EU, are not calling for leaving NATO. That was all there. You could also always be stricter, but I think the president or his team was cautioned by political parties or his advisors to be very careful. So I think given the circumstances and given the timing, and that we have only hours left for the voting to start, by the way, the voting has already started by post, for example, it's as much as he could do, I think.
Now, do you think, which voter base, I mean, we're talking about get out the vote, which voters are we talking about specifically? Who is the president looking to mobilize?
That's a great question. And actually, when you look at the polls and the successive surveys done by renowned agencies in Czechia, we see a trend of many former voters, especially voters of the current coalition, declaring openly that they want to stay at home this time because they're disaffected with the current government and they want to, in their perspective, voice a protest by not turning out to vote. Now, that is, a really short-sighted perspective. Of course, the people are entitled to have that opinion and not go vote. There is no voting obligation in Czechia. But by not turning out, you are basically making sure that the opposition has a higher chance of winning. And on the other side of the spectrum, so to speak, we have about 1 million votes that went called for, unrespected, unrepresented, so to speak, last time, because those approximately million votes ended up shortly missing the 5% threshold. So many parties, especially on the left of the political spectrum last time, did not get into parliament. So even for those voters who probably wouldn't be in favor of the current government that much, it is important to get out the vote, and so that they make sure that the chances of them crossing the 5% threshold are higher this time around.
Yes, now, Fiala warned against a potential government of national betrayal, supported by parties for which Brussels is worse than Moscow. How do you interpret this rhetoric, and what does it reveal about the polarization of Czech politics just ahead of the election?
That's a great question. 2 points. The first point, you alluded to it yourself. There are two camps in Czechia that are basically not permeable at all. There is the camp supporting, largely speaking, the opposition parties and the government. And those camps support their own parties within those camps and very rarely cross the lines and decide to support the other side of the political spectrum. What happened to Fiala and his government is that he has seen a consistent drop in popularity. As I said, many people declare that they want to stay at home this time around, and that opens the door to anti-establishment parties, including, unfortunately for Czechia, the very possible return of the Communist Party, this time rebranded to a coalition name to hide the fact that 90% of its candidates are open Communist Party members until that time. So by using a very aggressive rhetoric in the debate that you mentioned, Fiala is basically trying to appeal to his voters and say, look, if you don't turn out to vote, he probably understands the criticism, but if the people do not go and vote for them, the chances for the Communist Party, for example, to get elected is much higher, because historically speaking, Communist Party voters have been very disciplined and always turn out to vote. So their core of voters is very small, but those people always get up and vote for them.
Now, the Czech government has it's decided to ban holders of Russian diplomatic and service passports from entering the country with only limited exceptions. What message does this decision send, and how effective do you think it can be in countering Russian intelligence activities in Europe, and how does it resonate with voters?
I think more than anything else, it's most likely a gesture. We have to remember that Czechia has been at the forefront at the European level for years now, trying to get the EU as a whole to ban the entry of Russian diplomats to the EU and to the Schengen area. Largely speaking, Czechia has been unsuccessful as of today, because such a move would be very problematic on many levels. The EU still maintains that it wants to maintain diplomatic relations with Russia, notwithstanding the war against Ukraine that's still ongoing. So by doing small steps, by taking small steps like these, by banning entry onto their own territory, Czechia's I think, trying to increase the pressure on the EU on the diplomatic front and show that small steps can be done and can be effective. How effective they can be, that's a question, because, of course, Czechia, as well as Poland, for example, are part of the Schengen area. So, yes, we can ban certain people to enter, but how to prevent them from actually crossing the country's borders, that's a whole other level, because Czechia or Poland don't really have consistent border checks on respective borders, for example.
Right.
So, diplomats can still enter, but life for them is probably going to be a bit more complicated this time.
Yes, and since we're talking about elections, we can't not mention potential Russian interference. What are Czechs on the lookout for in these upcoming elections?
That's a great question, and it would take a lot of time for a whole another episode. But very briefly,
Yes.
just a few days ago, the intelligence services actually uncovered a sophisticated network of operations in Czechia run from Russia on TikTok, not dissimilar to things that we've seen, for example, in Romania. Remember, in Romania, such an operation led to the vote being cancelled by the Constitutional Court. Now, I don't think that anything like that could be happening, but just this morning, another piece of news broke about the Czech intelligence passing a ton of information to the regulators about a sophisticated operation by a network of accounts on TikTok primarily, trying to influence the election so that pro-Russian, openly pro-Russian candidates, such as the Communist Party, have a higher chance of winning. So this is definitely going to be a story worth following in the very near future.
Well, we'll be following these elections very closely. Ján Michalčák, former head of Unit for Countering Hybrid Threats at the Czech Defense Ministry, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.